It's another Marvellous Monday, so I'm back with another Marvel Legends review, and this week, continuing the trend of the last few weeks, I'm going to be looking at one of the X-Men animated series action figures, and it is of course Storm. And if this figure looks familiar, well that's probably because a very similar version of this figure had already been released a few years ago. That was of course the 90s Jim Lee design version of Storm from the comic book series, which in turn inspired the look of the animated series version of Storm. So quite natural that we get a re-release of this figure, perfectly appropriate, and to be fair, this initial release was actually pretty difficult to get hold of. Much like the Jubilee figure we looked at last week, this was a much wanted and pretty difficult to get hold of release first time around. So for that reason alone, this is a pretty welcome addition to the line, and of course there's a few pleasant little tweaks and surprises in here that make this distinctly the animated series version of Storm. But let's kick off by looking at the packaging, and I have to say, I'm a huge fan of this approach. I really love this retro design, this VHS effect that they've created for this packaging. I love this. I love the imagery that they've used. It's pretty much text-free. It's bright, it's colourful. I think it's original artwork, but it's very much in the style of the animated series. And I think this is a lot of fun, and I think it's really displayable. And anyone who's seen any of my other videos in this series will know I'm a huge fan of this side panel as well. I love this artwork, I love the consistency, I love the approach, the VHS style I think is really fun, but I particularly love this headshot at the top of the packaging, and when we put it next to the other figures in this collection, the fact that they're all looking in the same direction, and there's that really consistent look, feel and approach, plus these wonderfully vibrant colours really scream at you from the shelf. They're just really fun, they really pop, and they just look tremendous. The only thing that lets this packaging down, in my opinion, is the reverse of the packaging. As I've complained in other videos, at least a third of this packaging is given over to incredible small print, which I'm not sure is completely necessary, to be honest. There's a lot of information here that is just, yeah, it's a bit unsightly. The top 2/3 though are dedicated to a nice image of the figure. It is a digital rendering of the figure rather than a photograph of the figure itself. I don't mind that. I think that works pretty well. I think it's nice and colourful and quite fun. I just wish that image was maybe a bit larger and took up more of the space. We have a little bit of bio in different languages about the character, which is absolutely fine. So I think it's okay. It's a little bit underwhelming, especially when we think how colourful and how fun the central image is on the front of the packaging. Okay, so moving on to the figure itself. Well, as I said, some of you who already have the 90s Jim Lee Storm from a few years ago will recognise the base mould for this figure, but you will also probably spot a few little tweaks here and there, and I suppose the most obvious one would actually be the head sculpt. Now, I really like that they've actually gone to the effort to actually resculpt the hair. This looks brand new to me. I don't think I've seen this on a Storm figure previously, and I don't recognise this from any other figure either. This is quite distinctive look that Storm has in the animated series, and I'm sure there was a temptation to just reuse the head sculpt that was in the previous release, but I'm really glad that they went to the effort to actually mould brand new hair here, and this looks pretty good. It definitely has the volume that we see in the animated series, and I think they've done a pretty good job with this likeness all in all. Now, if you look carefully, you can see that she's got the lightning bolt earrings, which I think is a really nice touch. But if you look at the base of the hairline, you can actually see they've actually got a blue wash running through the hair. I think this is really, really nice. I think this is a fantastic little touch. It's just a shame they haven't got that running through the main body of the hair on the top. It would have been nice to have a little bit of a wash here to really capitalise on this sculpt. As it is, it just feels a little bit too white. It just needed a little bit of shading here and there. But it's nice to see that we actually do have that detail, even if it's in a slightly obscure, more difficult place to see. One of the things I really, really love about this line is the fact that they've really gone to great pains to really brighten the colours up on these figures to try and capture that animated style. I love how vivid and bright this yellow is. And of course, although her costume is white and isn't too different from the comic book version of the character, what we have here is some of this shading, so we can see the black lines that have been drawn in here and there. And I think this works really, really well on this figure. Probably one of the better examples in this line. I think it looks really visually striking and just makes the character really just pop. At her wrist, you'll notice there are string hoops. This ties to the cape and holds it in place. And I have to say, it looks really, really good, and I like this approach. I think this look is quite subtle, and it works very, very well. The cape itself seems to have really accurately captured the look and style from the animated series. I really like these colours. I think this works really, really well. The material they've used is a very thin material, very sort of like polyester feels, kind of plasticky feeling. It's not the greatest texture in the world, but I think it works well enough to hold the shape and yet be flexible, which is what we need here. Now, if I'm going to nitpick, one of the things I would pick up on is that she does have flat feet here, whereas in the animated series she actually does have a very small heel, so this isn't quite authentic, it's not quite right, but as I said, that is a very minor nitpick, and at the end of the day, she is going to balance a lot better with these flat feet, so I'm all in favour of it. Now, the articulation in the head is quite compromised by that new head sculpt, the hair there. She can turn her head from side to side, a surprisingly good distance all in all, but she can't really move it forwards and backwards, can't make the most of that joint that's there, unfortunately, because that solid, thick plastic piece is in the way. Now, her shoulder pads, thankfully, are loose. They will move up and down and work with the articulation, which is fantastic, and the shoulder does indeed have a ball joint to allow those arms to kick right the way up and out, and as you can see, there's no hindrance or resistance here, which is brilliant. Now, the lower arm does have a pin swivel, so it can spin all the way around and hinge to 90 degrees, but you're going to have to be conscious of that cape because that's going to crease and it's not always going to work with some of this articulation. You're going to have to be careful with that. Again, we have a pin swivel at the wrist, so again, that lower hand will rotate all the way around and it will hinge forwards and backwards, but again, be mindful of the cape. Now, she does have that upper chest joint, so she can spin from side to side, she can lean left and right, and she can bend forwards and backwards as well. And there's a pretty decent movement here. She can certainly look back a good distance and kind of forward slightly. Now, she's got hinged hips, so those legs kick out to the side. There's also an upper thigh swivel as well, and those legs kick forwards and they go back a little bit as well. There's a double jointed knee, so the lower leg kicks all the way back, and of course we have the ankle rockers there, so that ankle will pivot from side to side and it will hinge forwards and backwards as well. Now, so far, one of the things I've really loved about this series is the various extras and goodies that we get. Sadly, Storm is a little bit light when it comes to extras. She only comes with an extra pair of lightning hands. Now, we've seen these hands several times before in various different figures at this point, so this wasn't a real surprise. Sadly, there's no other bits and pieces, but again, I probably wouldn't expect too much to come with Storm anyway. And I do think you can create a pretty dramatic pose with this figure with those hands. I think this looks really, really good. So, time to sum up, and I'm going to give this figure a healthy 4 stars. There's a lot going in this figure's favour. First of all, it is a re-release of an earlier version of this character, which is pretty difficult to get hold of first time around, so straight away that's going to make this pretty attractive for those who missed out first time around. But added to that, I think if you're a fan of the animated series, I think they've done a really very, very nice job of creating the animated style here. So if you're specifically into that version of the character, I think this ticks a lot of the boxes. I really like this new head sculpt. I love this hair. I think this works really, really well. It is obviously specific to the animated series, and I think this is tremendous. I really love the colouring of the costume. I really love these black lines on that white body there. I think this works really well. It's very visually striking and it looks really cool. I really love the wings as well. We haven't seen this on too many other figures, and I think it just works. It's just a really nice design, and it's very visually striking. So why not 5 stars? Well, I did have to take a star off because there are some issues with this figure, and mostly that comes down to articulation. Obviously the head is massively hindered by that head sculpt, and it also throws the balance off the figure as well. It does make it a little bit tricky to pose sometimes because it is going to be top heavy, so there is going to be a tendency for the figure to want to lean or fall over. So you're going to have to be extra careful when it comes to posing this figure if you want it to stand. But other than that, pretty solid release. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.